The universe was broken, not in a poetic sense, not in the way an empire collapses or a civilization falls. It was broken in the most literal way possible, torn apart by war, its very fabric fractured into scattered realities, where time and space no longer play by the rules. Captain Elias Voss had spent most of his life navigating the wreckage of what once was. He had been born on a planet that no longer existed, raised on a fleet that had vanished into a temporal rift, and now lived as a scavenger among the ruins of humanity's lost glory. The old Terran dominion was gone, shattered by the Celestarch War centuries ago, leaving only isolated strongholds and war-torn remnants fighting for survival. He sat in the cockpit of his ship, the Revenant, staring at the scrambled signal looping on his console. It had been playing for hours now, repeating the same desperate message over and over. This is Admiral Helena Saros of the 7th Terran Fleet. If you are receiving this transmission, know that we still endure. Humanity still endures. The Nexus Core must be reclaimed, or all is lost. Elias exhaled slowly, rubbing his jaw. The 7th Fleet. A ghost story, a legend whispered in dark corners of the shattered universe. If the rumors were true, they had been lost in the war centuries ago, trapped in the unstable regions of fractured space. No one had seen them since. And yet, here was the proof. A signal. An old one, but real. Captain, this is a bad idea. Elias glanced over his shoulder at his second-in-command, Ro Varen, a former Dominion Black Ops operative. Ro had been with him long enough to know when trouble was brewing. Her cybernetic eyes glowed faintly as she analyzed the transmission data. This signal is over 100 years old, she continued. Whoever sent it is either dead or worse. Elias smirked. What's worse than dead? Ro's expression didn't change. Trapped in the rifts. Corrupted by whatever's lurking in there, or turned into something. Not human anymore. Elias leaned back in his chair, tapping a finger against the armrest. She wasn't wrong. The edges of known space were crawling with horrors. Creatures that had evolved in the shattered void, rogue AI warlords, even rumors of old Dominion weapons that had gained a mind of their own. And yet, despite all of that, something about the message gnawed at him. The Nexus Core. He had heard whispers about it before. A lost piece of Terran technology, said to be capable of restoring the universe to what it once was. A myth. A fantasy. Unless it wasn't. Elias turned back to the controls. Set a course, he ordered. We're answering the call. Ro sighed but didn't argue. As the Revenant powered up and prepared to enter the rift, Elias Voss had no idea that this mission would change the fate of humanity forever. The void beyond the rift was a graveyard. As the Revenant emerged from the unstable slipstream, Elias Voss and his crew found themselves surrounded by the wreckage of war. Hundreds of Terran warships, destroyers, battlecruisers, even dreadnoughts, drifted lifelessly in the dead expanse, their hulls scarred and broken, their insignias faded by centuries of decay. Goddamn, Ro Varen muttered from the co-pilot's seat, scanning the wreckage. This isn't a battlefield. It's a tomb. Elias said nothing. He had expected ruins, maybe the last remnants of a fleet scattered across this forsaken space. But this was something else. The warships hadn't been randomly destroyed. They had been picked apart, their hulls stripped of vital components, their insides hollowed like carcasses scavenged by something hungry. Captain, said Kara Holt, the Revenant's sensor specialist. I'm picking up a power source. Weak, but active. About 3 clicks ahead. Elias leaned forward. Can you identify it? Working on it, Kara said, fingers flying over the controls. It's definitely human. Wait. Her voice caught in her throat. It's a ship. And not just any ship. It's the Vanguard. A chill ran through the cockpit. The Vanguard was more than just a name. It was the flagship of the 7th Terran Fleet, a legend whispered among the last remnants of humanity. If it was still here, still functional, then Admiral Helena Saros might still be alive. Bring us in, Elias ordered. As the Revenant maneuvered through the wreckage, Kira suddenly stiffened. "Wait, I've got movement." The tension in the air sharpened. "Clarify," Rose said, fingers hovering over the ship's weapons system. "I don't know," Kira admitted. "Something's out there, moving between the ships. But I'm not getting clear readings. It's like they're there 1 second, gone the next." Elias tightened his grip on the controls. "Keep an eye on them." The Vanguard loomed ahead, a massive battle-scarred warship still clinging to life. Unlike the other wrecks, its power core was barely active, its shields flickering like the heartbeat of a dying giant. Its hull bore deep, jagged scars, but it was intact. A comm signal crackled to life. "Unknown vessel, you have entered a restricted zone. Identify yourself immediately, or you will be fired upon." The voice was strong, commanding, and despite the distortion, Elias recognized it instantly. "Admiral Soros," he said into the comms. "My name is Captain Elias Voss. We received your distress call. We're here to help." There was a long pause. Then another voice, lower, colder, cut in. "Captain Voss, if you truly want to help, then I suggest you prepare for battle. Because they found us." Kira's console lit up with warning signals. Multiple contacts inbound. From the shadows of the wreckage, something stirred. The graveyard was waking up. The first attack came without warning. Something massive tore free from the wreckage, a warship, but twisted beyond recognition. Its hull was jagged and uneven, stitched together from the remains of a dozen different vessels. Glowing, sickly green energy pulsed through its broken form, like veins in a corpse that refused to die. Then came the others. More ships emerged from the graveyard, moving with eerie precision. Some looked human, their battered forms suggesting they had once belonged to the Terran Dominion. Others were unmistakably alien, their surfaces writhing with biomechanical growths. Hostiles inbound. Kira shouted, her hands flying across the console. Multiple ships, all locking weapons. Elias didn't hesitate. "Shields up. Prepare for evasive maneuvers." The Vanguard's comms crackled to life again. "Captain Voss, this is Admiral Soros. Welcome to the war zone." Elias barely had time to respond before the first barrage hit. Bright streaks of plasma fire erupted from the enemy fleet, searing through the void. The Revenant rolled sharply to the side, narrowly avoiding a direct hit, while the Vanguard returned fire with its heavy cannons. The battle was chaos. The enemy fleet moved like scavengers, darting between the wreckage, using the debris as cover, striking with brutal precision. They weren't just pirates or raiders. They were something far worse. "They're Rift Raiders," Roe muttered, eyes scanning the tactical display. "Warlords who thrive in the shattered universe. They strip dead ships, steal technology, and turn survivors into slaves, or worse." Elias clenched his jaw. He had heard of the raiders before, but seeing them in action was different. They weren't just scavengers. They were predators. "Captain," Kira called out, her voice tight. "The Vanguard is taking heavy fire. If we don't do something fast, they won't last long." Elias knew she was right. The Vanguard was tough, but it was outnumbered. The raiders were circling, tightening their grip, preparing for the kill. A plan formed in his mind, a reckless, borderline suicidal plan. "Roe, take the weapons. Kira, get ready to punch the thrusters. We're going straight through their formation." Roe blinked. "That's insane." Elias grinned. "Good. That means they won't expect it." Before anyone could argue, he pushed the Revenant into full burn. The ship shot forward, engines roaring as it weaved through the battlefield. Plasma fire streaked past them, close enough to make the hull tremble. Then, at the last possible moment, Elias jerked the controls, sending the Revenant into a spiraling dive straight through the heart of the enemy fleet. It worked. The raiders, caught off guard, broke formation just long enough for the Vanguard to launch a counterattack. Turrets roared to life, blasting through enemy hulls. One by one, the raiders fell. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the battle was over. The remaining raiders scattered, vanishing into the depths of the graveyard. A moment later, Admiral Saros appeared on the comms. Her face was battle-worn, but her expression was unreadable. "Captain Voss," she said, "we need to talk." Elias Voss stared at the comms screen, locking eyes with Admiral Helena Saros for the first time. She looked exactly as the old records described, battle-hardened, fierce, the kind of leader who had survived hell and refused to break. And yet something in her gaze unsettled him. It wasn't just exhaustion. It was the look of someone who had seen too much. "Dock with the Vanguard," Saros ordered, her tone sharp. "We have a lot to discuss, and not much time." Elias nodded and cut the transmission. Minutes later, the Revenant latched onto the Vanguard's docking bay. The moment the airlock hissed open, armed Terran soldiers stood waiting, their weapons raised. "Not exactly a warm welcome," Ro muttered, her hand twitching near her sidearm. "They'd been stranded here for centuries," Elias replied. "I'd be paranoid too." A woman in a tattered but unmistakably Terran officer's uniform stepped forward. "Saros, you took a hell of a risk coming here," she said, "and an even bigger risk saving us." Elias shrugged. "I'm not big on letting humans die, if I can help it." Something flickered in Saros' expression. Approval? Maybe. But there was something else too. She gestured for them to follow. As they walked through the corridors of the Vanguard, Elias took in the state of the ship. The walls were scorched. Power flickered unpredictably. Some corridors were completely sealed off, likely due to hull breaches. "You've been fighting the Rift Raiders for a long time," he noted. Saros let out a bitter laugh. "Them, and worse." Elias exchanged a glance with Ro, but said nothing. They reached the command deck, where a massive holotable displayed the shattered star system around them. Saros tapped a control, and the image zoomed in on a distant, broken world surrounded by swirling energy storms. "This is Karsus," she said, "one of the last stable planets in this sector. And somewhere deep beneath its surface lies the Nexus core." Elias frowned. "How do you know that?" Saros hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Because we buried it there." Silence hung between them. "You had the core this whole time?" Ro asked, her voice sharp. Saros met her gaze. "We secured it. The Dominion believed it was too dangerous to use. The war broke out before we could decide what to do with it." She exhaled. "Now, with the universe still fractured, we don't have a choice. We need to activate it. But the Raiders aren't the only ones trying to stop us." She pressed another control. The holomap shifted again, revealing a second fleet moving toward Karsus. Elias's blood ran cold. It wasn't the Raiders. It was something worse. "The Rift Warlords," Saros said grimly. "The ones who shattered the Dominion in the first place. They've returned, and they were coming to finish what they started." The moment the words left Admiral Saros' lips, Barum plunged into tense silence. Elias Voss studied the holomap, his mind racing. The Rift Warlords, the architects of the universe's destruction, were back. And they were coming for the Nexus core. "How long do we have?" he asked. Saros exhaled sharply. 3 days, maybe less. Their fleet is moving fast." She zoomed in on the enemy formation. "We count at least 50 capital ships, hundreds of smaller craft. We're outnumbered at least 20 to 1. Ro let out a low whistle. Hell of an uphill fight. Elias turned to Saros. "Tell me about Karsus. What defenses does it have?" She keyed in another command, shifting the display. Before the war, Karsus was a fortress world. Planetary shields, orbital defense cannons, underground bunkers stocked with enough weapons to hold off an invasion for months. She hesitated. "But that was centuries ago. We have no idea what still works." Elias folded his arms. "So we'll have to assume the worst." Saros nodded. "The Vanguard and the remnants of the 7th Fleet will deploy first. We'll use whatever defenses Karsus still has and hold off the warlords long enough for a ground team to reach the Nexus core. Her eyes locked onto Elias. That team is you. Elias smirked. Figured as much. You're the only one reckless enough to pull it off, Saros said, a hint of amusement in her otherwise grim tone. But this isn't just about finding the core. If the warlords breach the surface first, they'll destroy it, or worse, use it for themselves. Ro frowned. Do we even know how to activate it? Saros's face darkened. We have theories, but no certainties. Elias sighed. That was the way of things. Nothing was ever easy. All right, he said. Let's get to work. 30 hours later, high orbit over Karsus. The Vanguard and the remnants of the 7th Fleet dropped out of slip space just as the first warlord scouts arrived. From the cockpit of the Revenant, Elias watched the war begin. The warlords didn't hesitate. Their ships, jagged behemoths of mismatched technology, surged forward like a tidal wave. Plasma bolts and kinetic rail slugs filled the void. The Vanguard's cannons roared to life, carving through the first wave of enemy ships, but there were too many. Kira's voice crackled over the comms. We've got a clear path to the surface, Captain, but not for long. Elias gripped the controls. Then we take it. With a sharp dive, the Revenant punched through the chaos, streaking toward the war-torn planet below. On the horizon, beyond the ruins of an ancient city, lay the buried Nexus core, and the fate of humanity. The descent onto Karsus was brutal. Elias gritted his teeth as the Revenant tore through the planet's turbulent atmosphere, the ship shaking violently under the pressure. The skies were alive with streaks of fire, drop pods, wreckage, and burning debris from the orbital battle above. Behind them, the Vanguard and what remained of the 7th Fleet fought desperately to hold back the Rift warlords, but it was only a matter of time before the enemy broke through. Brace for impact, Kira shouted from the co-pilot's seat. The ship slammed into the ground, kicking up a wave of dust and debris as it skidded across the ruins of an ancient city. Metal groaned, alarms blared, but somehow the Revenant held together. Ro unbuckled first, grabbing her rifle. Let's move. The warlords won't wait for us to catch our breath. Elias shoved open the cockpit hatch and leaped onto the battlefield. Karsus was a wasteland, crumbling towers, shattered streets, and the skeletal remains of an old Dominion fortress in the distance. And buried deep beneath that fortress lay the Nexus core. A squad of Vanguard Marines met them, led by a grizzled officer named Lieutenant Gaius. We've secured a path to the core chamber, he reported, but we have a problem. Elias wiped the dust from his visor. Just one. Gaius hesitated. We intercepted a message from inside the fortress. Someone, human, got there first. Ro's eyes narrowed. What do you mean, human? They're Dominion loyalists, Gaius said. Survivors who believe the core shouldn't be used. They've taken control of the main vault and locked us out. Elias swore under his breath. The Nexus core was humanity's only chance to repair the shattered universe. But if these traitors destroyed it, or worse, activated it on their own terms, the consequences would be catastrophic. He turned to Ro. Looks like we got two enemies to deal with. Ro smirked, checking her weapon. Just another day at the office. The team moved fast, navigating through the ruined city toward the fortress. Plasma fire echoed in the distance as warlord dropships began landing, their forces swarming the ruins. But Elias had no time to worry about them. The traitors inside the fortress were the priority. They reached the main entrance, an enormous blast door, reinforced with Dominion-era plating. Locked tight. Can you override it? Elias asked Kira. She was already working, her fingers flying over a hacking pad. Give me a minute. We don't have a minute, Gaius warned. Incoming. From the ruins behind them, warlord troops charged forward, hulking, armored creatures wielding energy rifles and serrated blades. The battle erupted instantly. Elias raised his rifle and fired, dropping 2 enemies in quick succession. Ro fought like a machine, taking down targets with ruthless efficiency. Kira's voice cut through the chaos. "I'm in." The blast door hissed open. Elias didn't hesitate. "Move." As they rushed inside, a voice crackled over the fortress intercom. "You should have stayed away, Voss." Elias's blood ran cold. He knew that voice. The real fight was just beginning. The voice over the intercom sent a chill down Elias Voss's spine. It wasn't just some faceless Dominion loyalist holding the fortress. It was someone he knew. The doors slammed shut behind them as Elias and his team entered the ancient Dominion stronghold. The air was thick with dust and the lingering scent of burnt metal. Massive corridors stretched before them, lined with rusted banners of the old Terran Dominion. The past was everywhere, but there was no time for nostalgia. Ro moved beside him, her weapon raised. "Who was that?" Elias hesitated. "His name is Marcus Strain. He was Dominion intelligence." Kira frowned. "Was?" "He died," Elias said grimly. "Or so I thought." A new voice crackled over the fortress speakers, calm, measured, and laced with amusement. "Disappointed, Voss. You should know by now that the Dominion never truly dies." Elias clenched his jaw. He had worked with Strain long ago, back when the Dominion was still holding on by a thread. Strain had been a true believer, convinced that only absolute control could hold humanity together. If he was here now, it meant one thing. He wasn't planning to save the Nexus core. He was planning to keep it out of their hands. "We need to move," Elias said. "If Strain's in control, he won't just lock us out. He'll destroy the core before he lets us use it." The team pressed forward, navigating the dimly lit corridors. Every step felt like walking into an ambush, and then the gunfire started. Dominion troopers emerged from hidden alcoves, opening fire, the air filled with plasma bolts. Elias dove behind a rusted console, returning fire as Ro took out 2 soldiers with precision headshots. Gaius's Marines pushed forward, clearing the hallway with practiced efficiency. "We're running out of time," Kira warned. "I've hacked into the fortress schematics. Strain is in the core chamber. He's rigging it with explosives." Elias swore. "Then we go through him." They stormed deeper into the fortress, cutting through resistance. Every step was harder. The traitors were well-trained, well-prepared. But Elias had fought too long, lost too much to stop now. Finally, they reached the core chamber. The doors slid open, revealing a vast, circular chamber bathed in eerie blue light. At its center, suspended in an energy field, was the Nexus core, a pulsing sphere of impossible energy, radiating power beyond comprehension. And standing before it was Marcus Strain. He was older than Elias remembered, his face lined with age and war. But his cold, calculating eyes hadn't changed. Strain smirked. "You should have let history die, Voss." Elias raised his weapon. "Funny. I was about to say the same to you." Strain tapped a command on his gauntlet. The doors slammed shut. Defense turrets activated. And then the countdown began. 3 minutes until detonation. The final battle had begun. The countdown clock flashed a merciless 2:59. Marcus Strain stood between Elias and the Nexus core, his gauntlet-linked explosives primed to detonate. The chamber was bathed in eerie blue light from the core, its swirling energy casting flickering shadows over the gunmetal walls. Turrets whirred to life, locking onto Elias's team. "Stand down, Strain." Elias barked, leveling his rifle. "This isn't the Dominion's fight anymore. Humanity needs that core." Strain smirked. "Humanity needs order. And the core will only bring chaos." He gestured toward the massive energy sphere behind him. "The universe shattered for a reason, Voss. We weren't meant to fix it." 2:40. Ro moved to Elias's flank, her grip tightening on her rifle. "Enough talk. We take him down, disarm the explosives, and activate the core." Elias gave a small nod. "Agreed." Then, everything exploded into motion. Turrets unleashed a hail of plasma fire. Elias dove behind a console as bolts scorched the air. Ro fired back, taking out the first turret with a precise shot to its power source. Gaius's Marines stormed forward, gunning down Dominion loyalists as the chamber erupted into chaos. Strain moved fast, raising a modified Dominion energy blade, its edge crackling with violet arcs of power. He closed the distance to Elias in a blink, slashing downward. Elias barely dodged, rolling aside as the blade carved into the floor. He countered with a punch to Strain's ribs, but the older man twisted away, striking with brutal efficiency. 210. Ro was already moving, cutting through enemy troops with precision gunfire. Kira worked furiously at a nearby console, trying to override the detonation sequence. "I need more time," she shouted. "We don't have it." Elias snapped. Strain swung again, his energy blade nearly catching Elias's shoulder. Elias blocked with the butt of his rifle, sparks flying from the impact. The two circled each other, old rivals fighting for the fate of a broken universe. "You don't get it, do you?" Strain growled. "The Dominion held humanity together for centuries. Without it, we've become scavengers, warlords, nothing." Elias narrowed his eyes. "That's where you're wrong." He feinted left, then drove his knee into Strain's stomach. The older man staggered, just enough for Elias to grab his arm and twist, breaking Strain's grip on the detonator gauntlet. 130. Strain wrenched free and lunged, but Ro was faster. She fired, one clean shot to the chest. Strain gasped, stumbling backward, clutching the wound. Elias caught him before he fell. Strain's eyes flickered with something, regret. Anger? He coughed, his voice a whisper. "You're making a mistake." Elias didn't answer. He grabbed the detonator from Strain's gauntlet and tossed it to Kira. "Shut it down." Kira's fingers flew over the controls. 045. "I've got it," she yelled. The countdown froze at 07. The chamber went silent, except for the hum of the Nexus core. Elias turned to it, heart pounding. "Now, let's fix the universe." The Nexus core pulsed, a swirling storm of impossible energy, humming with a deep, resonant vibration that sent chills through the chamber. It was more than a machine. It was alive, waiting, watching. Elias Voss wiped the sweat from his brow, stepping over Marcus Strain's lifeless form. The Dominion loyalist had died protecting his vision of order, but Elias knew the truth. The only way forward was through change, not clinging to a broken past. "We're in," Kira announced, fingers dancing over the ancient control console. "The core's systems are active, but it's not responding to my commands." Ro frowned, keeping her rifle raised in case any more surprises lurked. "So what now?" "We poke it with a stick." Elias approached the core cautiously, the energy within it surge, reacting to his presence, tendrils of light arsing toward him before fading away. It wasn't just a machine. It was something more. "Maybe it doesn't need commands," he murmured. "Maybe it needs a choice." Kira's brow furrowed. "What are you saying?" Elias turned to face them. The Dominion feared the Nexus because they didn't understand it. They thought it was a weapon, but it's not. It's a key. He glanced back at the core. "And we have to decide how to use it." The chamber trembled. On the holo display, red warning lights flared. Kira cursed. "We've got incoming." Elias turned to the screen. The battle above Karsus was reaching its breaking point. The Vanguard and the remnants of the 7th Fleet were barely holding together. And worse, Rift Warlord dropships were closing in on their position. "We're out of time," Ro said. "Activate the damn thing, Voss." Elias took a deep breath. Then, slowly, he reached out and touched the core. A surge of energy shot through his body. The chamber vanished. He was no longer standing in the fortress. Instead, he found himself floating in a vast, endless void. Stars, shattered and broken, hovered around him like dying embers. And in the center of it all, the core pulsed, an entity of raw power, waiting for a decision. A voice echoed, not in sound, but in his mind. "What do you seek?" Elias steadied himself. "Restoration," he said. "The universe is broken. Humanity is scattered. We need a second chance." The core pulsed again, its light shifting. "Restoration requires sacrifice. Do you accept?" Elias didn't hesitate. Yes. A surge of energy exploded outward, and suddenly he was back in the chamber. The Nexus core roared to life. Across Karsus, in the skies above, and throughout the ruined systems of the shattered universe, something shifted. The fabric of reality itself trembled. And then the impossible happened. The stars began to mend. The Nexus core pulsed with unimaginable energy, sending arcs of light spiraling through the chamber. Elias Voss staggered back, his vision blurring as reality itself shifted. A deep, resonant hum filled the fortress, the sound of something ancient waking up after centuries of silence. Then, across the battlefield, across the entire universe, the change began. High above Karsus, the Rift Warlord's fleet suddenly faltered. Ships that had been in perfect formation wavered as if struck by an unseen force. Some of the smaller craft outright vanished, pulled back into the restored flow of time, erasing them from the fractured history they had exploited. Others drifted powerless, their chaotic energies unraveling as the universe reclaimed what had been broken. On the ground, Kira gasped as her holo-display lit up with hundreds of readings. "Elias, I don't know how, but planetary systems are stabilizing. Gravity wells, time distortions, they're all collapsing back to normal." Robe looked out the massive chamber window, her eyes widening. "Tell me I'm hallucinating." Elias followed her gaze. Beyond the ruined cityscape of Karsus, the sky was changing. Where once there had been a cracked, unstable rift, the stars were now aligning. Constellations were forming as the fabric of space healed itself. The universe wasn't just being repaired, it was being reset. Then, a deep rumbling echoed through the fortress. The core was still surging, its power reaching further than Elias had anticipated. Kira's expression turned grim. "We have a problem. The core isn't stopping." Elias turned back to the swirling mass of energy. It had done its work. It had restored the universe. But something was wrong. The energy wasn't stabilizing. It was still growing, and it was about to consume everything. "If we don't shut it down, it'll keep rewriting reality until there's nothing left," Kira shouted. "We need to disengage it now." Elias felt his pulse hammering. He had activated the core with his will. Perhaps he could stop it the same way. He placed his hands against the glowing surface, feeling its immeasurable power coursing through him. "Enough," he whispered. "It's done." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the core began to dim. The swirling energy retracted, its storm-like power settling into something controlled. The fortress stopped trembling. The stars beyond the window held firm. The reset was complete. The universe was whole again. Ro let out a long breath, lowering her weapon. "Damn, that actually worked." Kiera checked her scanners. "Confirmed. Rift distortions have disappeared across every known sector." "We did it." Elias exhaled, stepping away from the core. He looked down at Strain's lifeless form one last time. "Some people couldn't let go of the past," he murmured. "But now, we all get a future." A transmission crackled to life in his earpiece. Admiral Sorrows's voice, alive with awe and disbelief, came through. "Voss, something just happened. The Warlord fleet collapsed. Star charts are correcting. What the hell did you do?" Elias smirked. "Just a little maintenance." Outside, dawn broke over Karsus. A new day, a new universe, and a future finally reclaimed.